Good morning. This is Heart of the Matter. Later this week, Senator Walter D. Huddleston will celebrate his 40th anniversary of being on the board of directors at First Federal Savings Bank, and we thought it was a good time to bring the senator in and discuss his war stories with the bank, but also some times that he shared here with our company, WIEL, and also his days in Washington, D.C. Senator, it's a pleasure to have you in studio.
Thank you, John. Good to be here. Familiar surroundings.
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
When you walked in here, I could see on your face some things kind of coming back to you.
Yeah.
So. But obviously, you're excited this week. You're celebrating a piece of your history that you've carried for a long time, your affiliation with First Federal Savings Bank, and I'm sure you're excited about that.
Yes, I am. It's been a great association for me to be with First Federal now for 40 years. That seems like an awfully long time, and it is.
Right.
But it was great to be appointed to that position and to watch the institution grow and develop over the years.
How did you come about being a part of the board? I know nowadays being a part, I'm sure it was then too, being asked to be on the board of directors is very prestigious.
Well, I felt like it was at the time. I, of course, had been active in the city as head of the radio station here, and knew a lot of people, and the directors of the board who name the new directors were familiar with me and with my work, and I suppose they felt like I would be an addition to the board, and thankfully they did nominate me.
How have you seen the banking world change in your 40 years?
Well, for goodness sakes, starting back before the 40-year period, when I came to Elizabethtown in 1952, there was one bank in E-Town, and it was First Hardin National Bank. And First Federal was located in the basement of that bank. So it was a pretty inauspicious start for that organization in those days.
Right.
But it did grow rapidly. Built a new building there at the corner of Mulberry and West Dixie, and that's just kept expanding and growing since then. I think quite amazingly. As I said, there was only one bank in town, and now, as you know, there's almost
tons.
one on every corner.
That's right.
And that just speaks well, I think, for the area itself, on how it's developed economically and continued to create jobs and continued to grow. And our bank, First Federal, has gone right along with it, in addition to expanding into other areas.
I was going to say, under your all's leadership and Keith Johnson's leadership, that bank is now in Jefferson County and doing things up there very well.
Yes, we moved into Jefferson County. We have 2 branches there now and looking for additional locations. And since I came on the board 40 years ago, we've purchased the banking facilities in Meade County, Brandenburg and Flaherty, in Bullitt County, Mount Washington and Shepherdsville, and opened branches in Bardstown, and I believe Mumfordville has come since I was on the board. So we've been continually expanding. In 1966, when I came on the board, the assets of the bank were about $28 million. Let me change that, probably $38 million. Today, they're almost to $790 million. So that's a tremendous growth for the bank.
Absolutely, absolutely. Let's switch gears a little bit. And you came to Elizabethtown, Kentucky in 1952 to run a radio station, WIEL, that had been on the air for 2 years. What enticed D. Huddleston to make the venture from Cumberland County? Is that right?
I came here from Bowling Green.
Okay.
I was born in Cumberland County a long time ago.
Okay.
Well, it was a great opportunity for me. I'd been out of college for 3 years and working in Bowling Green, and loved it down there. I was doing sports, and I was program director of the radio station there. And the owners of this station, looking for a manager, there was an acquaintance of theirs who was living in Bowling Green, and he recommended me, and they called me, and I came up and interviewed and was hired within a few days.
Okay.
And it was a great step up for me and a great opportunity. I loved Elizabethtown, my family did, and we've had a great life here.
So, you were brought in, what, 25 years old?
I was 26 years old.
Wow.
When I
to be the general manager of the radio station in Elizabethtown.
Yeah, that's also a big difference in those days. Elizabethtown was one of the few towns its size to have a radio station. It was the only station in town. There was no radio station in Bardstown or Litchfield or Radcliffe or any of the other small towns.
What enticed? I guess, how did the radio station contribute to Elizabethtown's growth? How did Elizabethtown contribute to WIEL's growth at that time?
Well, I think, of course, first of all, the radio station was sort of a novelty in Elizabethtown. That was before I got here. By the time I got here, 2 years later, it was being accepted, and I think the people in town were proud of the fact they had a radio station, and the businessmen were eager, maybe, to advertise on it, and it became successful very quick. I think the station people appreciated the position we were in, and we tried to offer really community service. We spent nearly all of our time thinking of ways to get people more involved in the radio station and make sure we cover all of the events in the area. And
I know radio then and to a certain degree now, I mean, it varied on. I mean, there was radio's kind of gone back to that where we're losing formats. I mean, the Sam format, the Louis format that people have now, but then you weren't really nailed to a certain format on WIEL.
Well, we couldn't in those days. In fact, the FCC required a balanced kind of programming, and particularly since we were the only station in town, you didn't have stations, Mitch, anywhere in those days that concentrated on any one subject. In other words, country music only or news only or this type of thing. You had to show that you were serving the entire community.
What changed that? I mean, you were in the business for 20 years. I mean, by the time you got out of it, had that changed?
Yeah, it was beginning to change, due, I think, primarily because of the proliferation of radio stations. I think it became apparent when a small town had 3 or 4 stations available that each one had to find a niche of its own and concentrate on that niche in order to be successful. And I think that's continued and even grown as time has passed.
Now, a general manager, as I can speak to now, wears many hats. I'm sure you wore many hats. I know you were sports director at KCT in Bowling Green and program director there, and I'm sure you did quite a few ball games here as well. Do you have some sports memories to possibly share?
I have a lot of sports memories. Sports broadcasting was my favorite thing, and if times had been like they are now, I probably would have stayed in sports broadcasting. But in those days, there were very few exclusive jobs. In other words, there were 3 or 4 stations following the University of Kentucky and the University of Louisville all the time. Consequently, none of them made much money at it. And after I got into management here, and with a young family, I decided that I should probably stay in management rather than sportscasting. But I have some great memories of sportscasting. And I broadcast games under 3 of what I consider to be the best basketball coaches in the country. And Adolph Rupp, Ed Diddle down at Western, and Peck Hickman at the University of Louisville.
Wow.
And under Bear Bryant at the University of Kentucky. But I started actively in sports broadcasting while I was a student at the University of Kentucky. I was head of the sports department of the local radio station, the school radio station. And we broadcast the home games of both football and basketball. And that's where I got acquainted with Adolph Rupp, followed the Wildcats in their home games, and really took a liking to the idea of sports broadcasting. Then I went to Bowling Green, and there was Coach Diddle and the Western Hilltoppers, and I broadcast their games for 3 years. Traveled all over the country. An interesting thing was that the last game I did for Western Kentucky was in Madison Square Garden, New York.
Wow, at the NIT?
NIT. The first game I did after I came to Elizabethtown was down at Linvale High School. And that was quite a jump. But I enjoyed doing the high school games, and I did them a while, and hired Dick Curtis, who was a very fine broadcaster for WIEL many years. But then the University of Louisville was having trouble getting their games broadcast throughout the state. So they contracted with us. WIEL was the originating station for 3 years of University of Louisville basketball. And I did the play-by-play on those games, and that was very interesting. I broadcast the game where Louisville beat Kentucky in the NCAA regionals up at Northwestern, and that was pretty exciting venture, to say the least.
You said WIEL was the originating station?
We originated a statewide network.
Wow.
Yeah, we sure did, right out of here.
Wow.
And we made all the arrangements for all the broadcasts, and that was a very good solution. And later on, we originated a statewide network for University of Kentucky football.
Wow.
For a season, right out of this station. Yeah.
Wow, I did not know that.
And that was a good experience too. I did the play-by-play on those games. One of my spotters on one of the games at the UK football games was Jim Host.
Wow.
Whose name may be familiar now since he's trying to get the arena in Louisville.
That's right.
Yeah.
Well, and he ended up owning the broadcast rights, and
yes,
I think
he
still does.
he still does. That's
right.
I try to take credit for all of his success.
But no, Mr. Host has done exceptionally well with that. But any particular special memories you can point to out of the sports world there? I'm sure there's a bunch, but
just so many. It was almost an entire lifetime endeavor. Almost. I mean, during the time I was involved, it was consumed a great deal of our time. I remember Western once was scheduled to fly into Dayton to play University of Dayton, and they were intending to fly on game day. And the weather turned bad, and they couldn't fly, so they had to go by bus, which meant they got there about 3 hours late. And that's when Dayton was really a basketball powerhouse. And so they were waiting for us. They had a police convoy out at the edge of town to escort the team into the gymnasium, and the crowd was waiting, and they were all hyped up. And they took on Western, of course, was out of sync first half and fell behind. But in the second half, they started pecking away and finally won the game, and that was one of the highlights, I think. And
imagine it was another jump to go from Coach Rupp to Coach Diddle, I would imagine.
Well, it was in the other direction. Well, it was a little bit both directions.
Okay.
Yeah, it was. Both of them were I consider to be great persons, great individuals. Coach Diddle, of course, was known for his malapropisms, the way he would misuse the English language and whatever.
Right.
But I was in his office one day when he was dictating a letter, and for 3 or 4 minutes he used perfect English. He sounded like a college professor, which led me to believe that a lot of that was show on the part of Ed Diddle, and he was a great showman. Another thing that impressed me, Coach Diddle also coached baseball at Western. And when my oldest son, Stephen, was about 2 years old, I took him out to one of the games they were playing, and a boy fouled a ball off into a neighboring field that was grown up in weeds. And, of course, one thing Diddle would never do is lose a ball. So he stops the game, sends both teams over there to find the ball, and finally they do find the baseball.
So both teams have left the field to go look for this baseball.
Go look for this baseball. They find the baseball and they bring it back. Coach Diddle carrying it, and as he comes by me and my son sitting on the bench, he takes that baseball and hands it to my son Steve.
Wow.
And of course he still has that ball, and it was an interesting thing.
Wow.
Coach Rupp had a lot of good experiences with him, both in basketball. I went out for basketball at UK as a player at Jeffersontown. I had made all-conference team my last 2 years. It was the war was going on, and they were scrapping to get any kind of players they could get. And anyhow, he made an inquiry about me, but before I could respond, Uncle Sam called, and I was inducted into the Army. So when I came back, I went to UK, and I knew I wasn't talent for playing for the University of Kentucky, but I had played in the Army after the war stopped, and played with some college players. So I thought, well, maybe I ought to go by and see Coach Rupp, and I did. And to my surprise, I was ushered into his office, and I told him the story that he'd inquired about me, and he thanked me for coming out. He said, "I'm glad you're here." He said, "We're going to have tryouts tomorrow. I want you to come by." And I did go by with about 150 other guys. And, of course, he had just won the National Invitational Tournament the year before, and had 5 All-Americans on the team. So anyhow, I lasted about 3 days on that, and that's more than I expected. But later on, I got to know Coach Rupp. I had him in Washington to testify before an agriculture committee. I was subcommittee I was chairman of, on raising beef cattle. And he didn't mention basketball. And he made a great hit there.
Oh,
and
nice.
we became good friends.
Wow.
Yeah.
It is interesting. So you wore the blue and white for at least 3 days, right?
Yeah, I did. They put me on guarding Ralph Beard. First, they gave 5 little 5-minute segments there.
Right.
I think I saw him twice during that 5 minutes. He was driving in for a layup both times, so I saw right there I was in over my head a little bit. But it did give me a good leg up in broadcasting.
Now you left WIEL. Of course, you spent some time in the Kentucky State Senate for a while. Tell us a little bit about that experience.
Well, I had no intention early in going into politics in any way, but being head of a radio station, being involved in the many activities going on in the community that you naturally are, having been president of the Chamber of Commerce and the Rotary Club and various other things, many candidates who were running for state office would come by to solicit my help, and I helped some of them. And I thought, well, I might like to be in the state legislature because it only meets once every 2 years. Didn't have the interim system then, so when the 60 days was up, you were through for another 2 years. So I thought that was something I could probably handle and still carry out my responsibilities in the radio business. And the Senate seat opened up, state Senate. So I decided that would be a good place to make a start, and I ran and won. I don't know whether that was fortunate or unfortunate, but at any rate, it was Hardin and Meade counties and carried every precinct in that whole district. And then the second, after 4 years, was not opposed, so I ran unopposed, and that's the best way, I can tell you. And so reelected, and then was named to majority leader of the Senate for a session. And here again, I was contemplating my future and wondering whether I ought to be in politics or not. And the U.S. Senate seat opened up. As it happened, Wendell Ford had become governor. I was a state campaign chairman, so we were close and had been close for years. And it seemed if I were ever going to even contemplate moving any further up, that was the time to do it. And my decision was either to do that or to get out of politics altogether and concentrate on business.
Sure.
But I decided I'd make that race once in a lifetime opportunity because everything doesn't fall in place very often. And even though I was having to run against a former governor who had been pretty popular, Louis Nunn, and that did present quite a challenge. And it was also a presidential year, and at that time President Nixon was very popular. That was before Watergate. And so that was a problem too, but I did have the governor of the state on my side, and and had just come out of a statewide campaign working with him. So I thought it was worth a chance.
Sure.
And we made it. We won. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Now, how did I guess in your statewide races, or in your political races, when you came back and told the owners of the radio station, "Look, I'm going to give this a try," what was their reaction?
Well, they were
to that?
supportive, and that was very helpful to me, and was really the only way I could do it, because if I'd had to give up my job, I couldn't have done it. So,
Right.
So they were supportive, and we got it done.
Okay. Now, in 1972, you left WIEL to go to Washington, and what was the climate? What you expected, or I'm sure there was plenty of things that you weren't. But.
Well, there were of course a lot of things to get used to. Even though I'd been in the state legislature, state senate for 8 years, and saw how it worked, and it's pretty well patterned after the National Congress. And I'd been able to observe Congress pretty closely through my broadcasting and whatever. So it wasn't like totally going into a new world, but still a lot of differences, and it was a matter of learning the ropes in the first couple of years. Yeah.
Sure. Now, I mean, I guess what seat opened up? Whose seat opened up for you to take over, and then who was the senior senator, I guess, from Kentucky that kind of helped you along? Maybe?
Senator John Sherman Cooper,
okay,
retired, a Republican, and so I was running for an open seat. Already there was Senator Marlowe Cook,
okay, in
his first term, and of course he was defeated by Senator Ford 2 years after I got there.
Okay.
Which made me the senior senator for the last 10 years I was in the Senate. Yeah.
Okay, all right. Well, what were some things, some mandates that you really wanted to get accomplished while when you left Elizabethtown? What were some things that were on your mind that you wanted to get passed in Washington? Well,
first of all, I had to recognize the nature of Kentucky, which was principally agriculture at the time, and also Fort Knox, and did a lot of work, got a lot of things done for Fort Knox, served on the Agriculture Committee, and of course in those days just protecting the tobacco program, which at that time was thought very essential to the farmer, and that was a constant battle every year, and we managed to do it during my time there, but we could see the handwriting on the wall and it wasn't going to last forever. So, all of the agriculture programs, local kind of programs that various cities utilize to provide for facilities were very important to me. Early in my term, they formed the Intelligence Committee, a committee to investigate the intelligence operations of the country. I was named to that. It was very interesting, very time-consuming. And I think did a lot of good, but it, from a political standpoint, it wasn't particularly enhancing to my prospects. But I thought it was a service to the country and did it. Nearly every day, a new issue was up that we had to deal with, and that's just the way the Congress works.
What were some big roadblocks for you in the things that you wanted to get done?
Well, of course, doing things for your own state, you do run into problems with how it affects the total budget, the total operation of the government, and that sort of thing. So a lot of things you try to accomplish, some you do and some you can't. And,
sure.
There's a lot more now. We used to call them pork barrel, and you didn't trumpet so much individual appropriations you got because the public didn't accept them. Now that seems to be the big thing, and we got so many things that we never would talk about much. Now every dollar that a congressman can get for his state is really advertised.
And in doing some homework and preparing for today, I noticed that a thing that jumped out at me is that in 1977 you sponsored an anti-terrorism bill, and of course today that's the you hear that everywhere, the word terrorism.
Right.
How was that the beginning of what we now know today as the war on terror?
It was to some extent, and it came from my exposure on the Intelligence Committee and on the I was on the Armed Service Subcommittee of the Appropriations Committee and that type of thing. And we also did a lot of work, even though I wasn't on an appropriate committee, on immigration if what we had determined, or what we were trying to accomplish on immigration 25 years ago had been passed, we wouldn't have the problem we've got today. But that's one thing about Congress. They can hardly deal with an issue until it becomes a crisis.
Right.
Just too many things on the plate to worry about something that is not already a crisis. But I could see it coming, and I tried to do something about it. And we did get some immigration law passed, but not what we should have. And now it's a very difficult problem to deal with now.
In pointing back to September 11th, when you saw those events taking place, in your places on the Intelligence Committee, and I'm sure the contacts that you still have in Washington, did you have a pretty good idea of who was responsible, what was happening? And
yeah, I think you could pretty well assess the situation and know principally where it was coming from, if not in the particulars. And the situation now with Iraq kind of baffles me, because we had intelligence hearings, and I'm talking 25 years ago now, in which the situation in the Mideast, which very few people paid any attention to in those days, as long as the oil was flowing, nobody cared much. But in these briefings by the experts, anybody who sat in on those briefings knew, and do know now, that what happens in Iraq was going to happen. Sure. It was an absolute blueprint for exactly what's happened, and it's unfortunate. It's unfortunate that we're there, and but it's a pretty tangled mess right now.
Where do you see, after this administration is over, what's the future of politics nationally, on the national scene, in your opinion?
Well, I don't like the trend in politics, of course, that has come about mostly since I left the U.S. Senate in 1984, and that is I'd call it dog eat dog. They destroy your opponent. In my day, we had differences, and we argued them out on the floor, and we were passionate about our positions, but we didn't try to destroy the people who were against us. We recognized they had a point of view also. Now the whole policy is, and if you disagree, then the effort is made by various organizations to absolutely destroy you politically. It's and the campaigns are run that way now. The last presidential campaign, in my judgment, was a disgrace to the United States on both sides, because the real issues were pushed aside for issues that had no real bearing on who ought to be president. And I don't see this getting any better, because it apparently is working.
Right.
And I don't know what the answer is going to be.
You in 1984, as you said, you walked away from the Senate. Did you ever consider running again for any sort of office?
No, I didn't.
Okay.
I did not. I felt like I'd done the best I could do, and I should start thinking about making a living and preparing for old age.
So what is D. Huddleston doing nowadays?
Well, I still am associated with a firm in Washington as a consultant, and don't do much work except make a few telephone calls, go up a time or two, and of course serving on the board of First Federal and trying to do my job there. I have plenty to keep me busy, plus trying to play a game of golf.
I was going to say, I think you probably chase the great white ball every once in a while, don't you?
Yeah.
But anyway, Senator D. Huddleston has been our guest here on Heart of the Matter for the last half hour or so. And Senator, we appreciate your time, and not only your time and your service to First Federal, but here in this building. And if you weren't as successful as you were, I'm not sure I'd be sitting here. So I appreciate that, and your service to the community and to our country.
You're doing a good job. And while radio is so much different than it was when I was in it, I notice people are still quoting it. People used to tell me I never listen to the radio anymore, and then before the conversation was over, they'd tell me about something they heard on the radio. Right. So I think people are listening without being conscious of it a lot of times.
Oh, absolutely.
And, it's a great media, and the fact that it's been able to survive television and all and now computers and everything else, I think speaks for its its ability to withstand almost any kind of assault.
That's right. Senator Dee Huddleston, our guest here on Heart of the Matter this weekend. Thanks for listening. Good morning. This is Heart of the Matter. Later this week, Senator Walter D. Huddleston will celebrate his 40th anniversary of being on the board of directors at First Federal Savings Bank, and we thought it was a good time to bring the senator in and discuss his war stories with the bank, but also some times that he shared here with our company, WIEL, and also his days in Washington, D.C. Senator, it's a pleasure to have you in studio.
Thank you, John. Good to be here. Familiar surroundings.
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
When you walked in here, I could see on your face some things kind of coming back to you.
Yeah.
So. But obviously, you're excited this week. You're celebrating a piece of your history that you've carried for a long time, your affiliation with First Federal Savings Bank, and I'm sure you're excited about that.
Yes, I am. It's been a great association for me to be with First Federal now for 40 years. That seems like an awfully long time, and it is.
Right.
But it was great to be appointed to that position and to watch the institution grow and develop over the years.
How did you come about being a part of the board? I know nowadays being a part, I'm sure it was then too, being asked to be on the board of directors is a very prestigious
Well, I felt like it was at the time. I, of course, had been active in the city as head of the radio station here, and knew a lot of people, and the directors of the board who name the new directors were familiar with me and with my work, and I suppose they felt like I would be an addition to the board, and thankfully they did nominate me.
How have you seen the banking world change in your 40 years?